Hello, people. Andrew here, talking about comics from a reader, collector, speculator, investor point of view, in that order of importance to myself. And today I'm continuing on with the New Mutants, so the New Mutants Part 2, I should say. So we're looking at issues 55 to 100, because the series ran to issue 100 before it was changed over to X-Force, and we'll get to that. It ran from 1987 to 1991, primarily written by Louise Simonson and illustrated by, what's his name, Bert? Oh, it's Brett. Brett Blevins and for the first two-thirds, and then Rob Liefeld for the last third. So just a quick recap of what the New Mutants was supposed to be about. The first sort of spin-off book from the Uncanny X-Men. It was about a younger group of mutants, unknown, teenage. They were to go to the school to learn how to use their powers, how to find themselves within society so that they don't abuse their powers. Initially, it wasn't so much the idea that they were going to be training as replacement for the X-Men, but that's somewhat how it developed, and even more so in this second half. So the second half, from issue 55 to 100, as I say, primarily written by Louise Simonson. And the question right away is it worth the read? And my answer is unfortunately no. And I have reasons why, and I am going to talk about those reasons why. Uh, the tone of the book didn't sit well with me. We have these teenagers. There's a certain degree of spontaneity, impulsiveness, and the way that she started writing them. And it was a certain innocence and naivete. And this was juxtaposed against the very serious nature of a lot of the conflicts that they encountered, including death of teammates, death of others, that's very dramatic. And the reason I find that the tone didn't work is because I found that it was a little bit too extreme. Not so much about the serious nature of it. That's what's going to happen in some of these comics and some of these situations. But it was almost like the frivolity of the teenagers. There were 54 issues before this where the group learned a lot of things. They had to deal with the Demon Bear, Legion, their teammate Karma going slightly off the rails and bringing her back into the fold. So their naivete and innocence that sort of expressed a little bit in Louise Simonson's role, to me it felt a little off. They would have been a little bit more battle-hardened and wearied because of events that have happened in their past already, but it seems to approach it with a little bit of a freshness. It's not entirely horrible the way that they express that, or she expresses that. It's all fun and games until somebody dies. That kind of concept, I can see that's where she may have been heading, especially in this first story arc that she did, involving a character called Bird Brain or Bird Boy, depending on where you look. But the tone itself didn't quite work well with me. So that was one thing that set me off. The other thing was the storylines themselves, the story arcs. I didn't care for the whole Bird Brain story arc. There were a number of crossover events that just I'm not that interested in. A number of these mutant versus human wars, and they are all-out wars. Now, I understand that this is sort of a metaphor for anybody that's being persecuted by another group, so the mutants stand in for that, and, how do they handle the situation? And I think there's a place for that. I just find that there's an awful lot of that in the X-Men, and repeatedly, and it's very conflict driven. It's always, a fight to the death between the mutants and the humans, the mutants and a mutant group that disagrees with them. Even they fight between themselves. Eventually you'll get to the point where it's like the Uncanny X-Men versus X-Factor versus X-Force, and there's a lot of battle issues. And while it is a comic book and I understand the action and the desire to see one hero versus another hero, it does get tiresome. And I found that the number of crossover events that happened in this run It was a little too many, and I don't think that they were very strong. So, for to Louise Simonson's, defense, she was given a number of crossover events that she had to write part of the titles for. Now, she was the spearhead of one of those, the Inferno storyline, so she had more say in it, and she was allowed to tell stories within the New Mutants context for some of these events. But I'm not crazy about these kinds of events that happen, so I wasn't happy about those storylines. And then there was, a little trip to Limbo wasn't bad. The Limbo storylines had merit. But the whole trip to Asgard failed for me as well. The breaking up the team, putting them into different areas of Asgard, and all these little challenges and stuff. I just didn't think that they worked well in Asgard. And this splitting the team and telling different stories about the team until they get together. I think she learned from that, as you see when we get to the X Factor part, because she wrote a much better story based on that sort of premise as well. But that was way over in X Factor a few years later. So this is the first issue of the Louise Simonson, Brett Blevins. I don't even think Brett Blevins did the artwork on this one, but he's pretty much the consistent artist up until issue 85. 85 is his last issue. There are some fill-in writers, plotters, and artists, and there are a number of different artists that take care of the covers. Somewhere along the line, I think there's a John Byrne cover and a Mike Mignola cover. But for the most part, you're looking at Louise Simons and Brett Blevins. And the artwork, it doesn't help me give an upgrade to the book. It's not bad art, but it leaves me uninspired, and I find it I found the artwork is uninspired and left me uninspired as well. So, what can I say about the artwork? So, this is issue number 55. This is the beginning of the run. Issue 56 has the first appearance of Bird Boy, but because he's not on the cover, I thought I'd show you issue number 57. So this is who I'm talking about when I'm talking about Bird Boy or Bird Brain. And again, this story set the tone that disagreed with me, in that there was a sort of a frivolous goofiness to it compared to the fact that Bird Brain and his companions, not the New Mutants, but where he came from, they were being tortured to death. And so it just seems like it was a strange, let's take him out for fries in a movie, when this is somewhere hanging out in the background. Now I get it that the New Mutants don't know that this is going on at the time, but there doesn't seem to be any kind of investigation about where he came from and all that. And when they do finally get on board with that, to discover all these horrors. So one of the first crossover events was the fall of the mutants, and this was all about the Mutant Registration Act. Again, we got to capture all of these mutants and corral them. And this particular issue is a double-sized issue, and it's the death of Cypher, Doug Ramsey. I'm not big on the whole this sort of war situation. It's part of the reason I don't really read an awful lot of X books, and they're not high on my priority list to pick up and what have you, because as I said, I understand the need for the war or the discussion. I just find that it's just all fighting, and I'm not as interested in that. By issue 71. Okay, so this is the Inferno storyline that had to be run through a number of books. And this one was spearheaded by Louise Simonson, possibly because it was set in Limbo, or Limbo was a big part of it, and Limbo's magic's domain. Some of the stories involving magic in Limbo were interesting. This was probably one of the sort of the better of the crossover events, at least to me. It involved the Goblin Queen and the other X-Men and what have you. So it was better than some of the other ones. And again, there was other crossover events. This one is issue 76. This is part of the Atlantis Attacks, which I thought was a horrible crossover event. But this book takes place in that. And as I said, so Louise Simonson had to adjust for, I think, 5 different crossover events. There was the Fall of the Mutants, the Inferno, the Atlantis attacks, Acts of Vengeance, and finally Extinction Agenda. So hard to necessarily, move the story in the way that you want to when you're interrupted by these events. I suppose they're supposed to build character, and you can tell a story within this framework, and that is a good way to tell a story. I didn't find that it worked particularly well for me. So as of issue 86, we get a new artist, Rob Liefeld. So Rob Liefeld became, a very hot artist at the time. He was one of the hottest artists at this period of time, and it wouldn't be too much longer after this that he broke off with Todd McFarlane and Jim Lee and others to form Image Comics. He was a very popular artist. Now, I am not a fan of the Rob Liefeld art and art style, and unfortunately for me, this style sort of influenced a number of up and coming and new artists, and I'm sure Marvel was partly, to blame for that, because they said, "Hey, we want to repeat Rob Liefeld's success, so can you draw like Rob Liefeld?" And we got a lot of it. I find that Rob Liefeld is limited to about 3 expressions, and that's the gritted teeth or straight line grim look, or the evil smiley look, or the open mouth anger look. So that's what you get from his characters. And if it's a female character, you also get the pouty lip look. And that's about it for the description. And then it's muscles on muscles, and they're doing a lot of posing, and they just like to blow up a bunch of stuff all the time. And it's just, I'm not a fan of this particular artwork. I don't hate it, but I'm not on board with being like, I think he's the hottest artist at the time even. It didn't work for me. So that's where he begins, and that's got a Cable cameo. And here is the issue 87. Now, this is a second print, so it's not worth nearly as much as the first print. First print will set you back, I don't know, anywhere from $50 to $100, maybe more, depending if you grade it and the condition and what have you. But this is a second print that was bought years ago in a dollar bin. So it's the introduction of a character named Cable, and what a big surprise, I don't care for Cable. Part of the reason is time travel is a tricky sort of situation. Sometimes it works for me, sometimes it doesn't. But I find that a lot of the characters that come from a dystopian, horrible, bleak, miserable future, and they travel back into the past and say, we must do this now or this bleak future will happen. I don't care for those characters, and I don't care for that particular storyline. And I've seen it many, many, many times. And for me, Cable, I don't even understand exactly what his mutant ability is. I think he slides in and out of time zones or whatever. But I just know he likes to carry a big gun and blast things apart. Difference with Cable as opposed to some of the others is that he looks upon the team as a military strike force. And that's what he tries to shape these new mutants into, is a military strike force. Because there's a war coming on, don't you know? I am thankful, though, that with that attitude, New Mutants did come to an end with 100 and was relaunched as X-Force, because X-Force embraced that sort of that military strike force unit, and then I didn't have to read those, because I preferred the idea originally where it was going to be, these teenagers adapting to their powers, not necessarily designed to be in conflict. I mean, some conflict obviously has to happen in a comic book, but not designed to become warriors, but just to, understand how to use their powers. But that whole school thing was dropped fairly early, and not really paid a lot of attention to. It comes back later in some of the books. You'll see that you'll look at a school and they'll have classrooms full of different kinds of mutants, and I kind of like the way that it got there. But this is part of the journey to get them there, and I wasn't crazy about this. So this was the first appearance of Cable, as I say, the second print. And, this is the kind of thing that sells comic books. Is you've got Cable, who was a popular character, and I think he still is a popular character, against Wolverine, who is a popular character. So having the two of them battle out, I'm sure this issue sold quite well. And then you get to the Extinction Agenda, which ran through the three primary X books at the time. I think X Factor was running here, and so was Uncanny X-Men. I believe this is the death of Warlock, and Reign is somewhat compromised in Genosha. This is the war in Genosha. Again, it's a mutant war situation. And then in issue 98, by this time, Louis Simonson's last issue is issue 97, and Fabian Nikizia, is that how you say his name? I'm not sure. Anyways, he took over the writing for the last three issues, and in issue 98, we're introduced to this character known as Deadpool. And Deadpool, as you know, became a fan favorite, and there's been three movies with him, and he's now a mainstream character with a sideshow approach. Uh, Originally, he wasn't the merc with a mouth. He didn't break the fourth wall. He wasn't here for laughs and giggles. He was supposed to be a very top-notch, difficult assassin. I have problems with this character. As I said, he's changed character since his debut in issue number 98, but here's a character I want to show you. This is Deathstroke, who was created 10 years earlier by Marv Wolfman and George Perez for Teen Titans. His name behind the mask is Slade Wilson. He's a mercenary and an assassin, and paid to do these jobs. And he's got a healing factor. He's very difficult to kill, and he's very skilled. 10 years later, you get Deadpool, and his name is Wade Wilson, and he's a mercenary for hire and an assassin that paid money to kill people, and he's got an amazing healing factor, and he's one of the best in the business. So, I don't know. What do you think? They're pretty similar. In fact, and it's... I know that, one company will imitate another company for characters and stuff. You see that Submariner, Aquaman, you got Quicksilver, you got the Flash. But this one looks so similar, even down to the names themselves, which... So, is it a tribute to how much they enjoyed Deathstroke, or is it just because Deathstroke was a very popular character? They said, let's try and bank on some of that goodwill that Deathstroke has drummed up as far as, sales are concerned? I don't know. I still like Deathstroke better than I like Deadpool, although the Deadpool character has changed over the years. But initially, very much like Deathstroke, so not interested. 99, and this will get back into the spec zone because this is the first appearance of a character named Shatterstar. So you get Cable in issue number 87 that, as I said, $100, $50 to $100 book, maybe more depending on the grade. And then you get the Deadpool issue, which is the big issue, which is the most expensive. We'll get to that again. And then 99 featured Shatterstar. Now, I like Shatterstar's design. I don't know a lot about his character, but I like the design of the character. It is different than other characters that I've seen. What I've read about him, or when I read some of his adventures, I have no qualms about him. I like what I'm reading for the most part, but there's no love for Shatterstar. This book here, $5 to $10, and it's the first appearance of Shatterstar. And finally, you get to issue number 100. This was there's Shatterstar on the cover there. And as far as Domino, Domino, this is not the real Domino. That happens in X-Force itself. So her first appearance is not here. Her first look was in issue 98, but her first appearance isn't until somewhere in X-Force. And there's this character named Feral. I can't remember where Feral came from, but, it's just, instead of having Wolfsbane, now we've got Feral. I don't think much about that. So this was the 100th issue, the final issue, and it launches X-Force, which begins, probably the next month or whatever. And that's your run of the New Mutants, the second half. So as far as collections are concerned, just a recap for the whole, is it worth a read? To me, it isn't, because I found that a lot of story elements just didn't work for me. That's the main situation there. But as far as collecting, you're collecting it for the New Mutants. This sits in my New Mutants collection. I've got the whole thing complete now, so it will stay that way. It also features a number of different characters in there. We saw with the Atlantis attacks there was a Submariner. There's other X-Men that make their appearance. We saw Wolverine. There's tie-ins to various crossover books. The Fall of the Mutants, Inferno. The specific characters within the New Mutants that have a following, which such as Magic and possibly even Rain or Wolfsbane. So there's a number of reasons, and there's different artists, as I mentioned, John Byrne, Mike Mignola, Arthur Adams. They all contributed somewhere in here, either generally with a cover, so that you can track down some of the artists there. And of course, Rob Liefeld, because there are fans of Rob Liefeld from issues 86 to 100 is all his artwork. So, a place for the collectors. As far as the speculator, again, I would go back and say that in this particular run, the speculation book would be issue number 99, because that was the first appearance of Shatterstar. I think I still have that handy. Yes, I do. So, as I say, that one's only about $5 to $10. It hasn't registered anywhere yet. There's not a high demand for it. That would be what I would call a spec book. The other two books, issue 87 and especially issue number 98, these are what we would be calling the investment book. Now, this book here, would you invest in this book? It's hard to tell what the price on this book will be. If it's in a raw condition like this is like a 9 something, maybe a 9.2, 9.4, maybe even 9.6. I don't know. But you're going to be looking at paying a raw price around anywhere from. I'll give you an average price of $300 because I think it goes between $200 and $400 to get a high quality raw copy of issue number 98, the first appearance of Deadpool. As far as graded copies are concerned, there is one at the time of this recording. There's one graded copy at a grade of 10, another one at 9.9. And as far as the 9.8s, I got it written down here because there was a lot of copies. Okay, so there was over 4,600 copies of this book graded at a 9.8. Overall, there's over 31,000 graded copies of New Mutants number 98. So it's not a rare book. It's a very common book, and it's even common in 9.8. And I have seen prices for that 9.8 range from $500 to $1,500. Is it worth it to buy one at that price? That's entirely up to you, but I don't know that I see the price of it going up significantly. I think that's already pretty high for a 9.8 of a relatively common book, even if it is the first appearance of Deadpool. And I think with the 10.0 and the 9.9 in the marketplace, the demand for a 9.8 may even drop a bit because they'll say, hey, I'd rather, buy one of these, although I can imagine that they would be very expensive to buy in that kind of condition. What's wrong with this condition? This is a sharp looking book, and if anything, I would be buying, looking for a raw copy at a much lower rate and then having it graded yourself. But that's me. I mean, I don't know how people like to play the investment game when it comes down to graded books, so I'm not even going to suggest. I'm just saying that this is how I would, and I won't even get this one submitted for grading because I can see that it's a high quality, I don't need the grade on it, and I'm not trying to preserve it the same way that I am a Silver Age key book because of time and deterioration, what have you. The encasing in plastic does prolong the life of the book. But this is very, very common. So, what does it cost you to buy the entire New Mutants collection? And again, that price is going to vary, and it's going to depend a great deal on how much you're willing to pay for this particular book. You're going to be looking at least, for $200 for a decent copy of this book, and then there's the Cable one in 87. There's the going all the way back to the beginning with the Marvel graphic novel. That's going to cost you, $50, $50 at least for that, for first printing, maybe even more. There's some other key issues in there. So there's probably about 20 or so, maybe even 25 books that are going to cost you more than dollar bin pricing. But there is like 75 books within this run that are dollar book pricing. So where are we going to come out for the price of this entire collection, $500 to $1,000, depending on condition. Um, I would say no less than $500. If you get it for the whole thing for less than $500, I think you're doing well. And again, and I think that's also in decent condition as well. So it's kind of a more of a pricey collection to get as far as that's concerned. I mean, to some people, $500 is just a walk in the park, but I'm talking about people that like myself, where it's not a walk in the park, and where you got to consider about where you're spending your money. So that's it for the New Mutants. As I said, there are elements that I like more so in the first half, not so much in the second half. But there's more value in the second half than there's in the first half, and there's a couple of spec books in there that are sort of still floating under the radar. You maybe want to pick up on some of those if you're into that sort of thing. That's it for today, folks. Thanks for listening, and be good to yourself and be good to one another, and I'll see you again.